All right, well, here we go again, ladies and gentlemen. This us versus them narrative is getting really old to me, so it's going to be education time now. Do you know that a homicide means that death was caused by another person and has no criminal connotation inherently? I keep reading incendiary headlines everywhere that are saying that the death of Mr. Brooks in Atlanta was ruled a homicide. Congratulations, Sherlock. Mr. Brooks was shot by another officer, or by an officer, that resulted in his death. That is, by definition, homicide. It means literally nothing in relation to murder, manslaughter, or anything else criminally. Congratulations. So with that said, let's chat about Mr. Brooks for a second. Since you don't have a complete picture, let's widen the scope a bit. Mr. Brooks has made a long series of personal choices that got him to where he ended up. And I'm gonna go into some of that character as a backdrop because the whole truth matters. As an adult, we see Mr. Brooks already making poor decisions in 2011. That's 9 years ago for those of you who struggle with math like I do, okay? If we continue with those math skills, we can deduce that Mr. Brooks was only 18 years old when he received his first DUI. If we move forward, we see more lack of personal responsibility as well as further poor decision-making skills as we can follow Mr. Brooks through the years, through a variety of arrests and interactions with law enforcement, including multiple interference with custody charges, multiple obstructions of police charges, multiple false imprisonment charges, multiple thefts, simple battery on a family member, felony cruelty to children. And my initial response when I read that was I wondered if this was the same child that the media is touting him to be such a family man over. But I digress. I don't know. There are also several traffic violations which are inconsequential in regard to character, honestly, because let's be real, we all get those things from time to time, speeding ticket here and there. So you see, Mr. Brooks was not the special angel that the mainstream media would have you believe that he is to further their agenda of division by painting his image with innocence, okay? Now, with that said, the past has nothing to do with this interaction, but it does paint a picture that is more complete. So with that, we can better understand his potential for violence and his regard or lack thereof for the law. This is not relevant except that I believe that we all want to live in a nation where people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Often patterns of the past can help us in determining some of that character. Now let's talk through this incident, okay? Someone at a Wendy's drive-thru calls 911 because Mr. Brooks has passed out in the drive-thru line behind the wheel at a Wendy's. He hasn't fallen asleep. Don't start with that crap. He's not taken a nap in the parking lot. Nope. He has passed out in the drive-thru line. Okay? Upon the initial encounter, you can see him slumped over, right, in his car. At first, all is compliant. They knock on the door, they get him, the evening is going all swimmingly, all right? He pulls up and they get him out of the car, start talking to him. The officers involved are courteous and professional, as they should be. Mr. Brooks is performing the standardized field sobriety evaluations to the best of his ability through this process, which incidentally, from what I've seen, indicates he's impaired and is totally unsafe to be in the operation of a motor vehicle. Now, here's the thing. I've been asked this over and over again, and so I thought I'd address it. Why is he getting a DUI evaluation if he isn't operating the vehicle? In the state of Georgia, the DUI law is very clear, and I would encourage you to hit that internet search engine that you choose to use for that law. Search OCGA 40-6-391 and read up. You have to be willing to educate yourself on this stuff, because the media is not going to tell you the whole truth. However, I digress, and let's keep moving, okay? These officers are totally in the right on this portion. So now we're back to Mr. Brooks and the evaluation. Before I go on, this is important for me. I'm sure someone is wondering what makes me the expert here in this realm, okay? Well, in my time as a police officer, I was a police officer before, I have made hundreds of DUI arrests. I've never lost a single DUI case. Does that make me infallible? No, it does not. However, it does mean that I know what I'm talking about here, okay? This man was impaired. The officer on the scene also determines that he's impaired and informs Mr. Brooks that he is going to be arrested. Now listen, it was always my practice to tell my DUI arrests that they were under arrest as soon as the cuffs were already on them. All right. I wanted to tell them that way because I wanted that half-second advantage if someone decided to fight, and they did often. It was my experience that if someone was going to fight, it was going to be when the cuffs touched them and after you've told them they're under arrest. So if you can do that before, it's better. Therefore, it was safer for everyone if the cuffs sneaked their way on as nonchalantly as possible to the person you're arresting. The sneaky cuff stuff, though, does not happen here, and the fight is on. It's quick and it's brutal. I was having this talk with somebody, was it yesterday or the day before, about who was winning this fight. And I said, you really, honestly, you can't really compare the two, because what you have here is you have on one hand somebody who has no regard for anyone or anything and is willing to do whatever is necessary to escape the lawful consequence for his poor choices. And on the other hand, you have two other men who are trying to effect a lawful arrest without causing unnecessary injury to the person they're trying to arrest and potentially injuring or causing impact to those around them. Those things have totally different sets of rules of engagement. So you can't really compare them. But in short order, during the fight, Mr. Brooks begins striking forcefully and attempting to take the officer's taser. This is evident with your eyes that you can watch the video and you can see it, and with your ears listening to the video as the officer tells him over and over again to let go of the taser. Mr. Brooks also connects multiple pretty gnarly punches, one of which seems to stun one of the officers and put him flat on his back, and that's when they hit the ground, just prior to him escaping, grasping and fleeing with a taser. Now, at this point, we technically could articulate that deadly force was on the table as a response when Mr. Brooks took possession of the officer's taser. However, because his initial response wasn't, once obtaining the taser, wasn't to engage the officers further with a weapon, but his initial response was rather to run with that weapon, I believe that most reasonable officers would not have decided to use deadly force at that point. These officers did not choose to use lethal force at that point. Though it was authorized, they didn't do it. In fact, at this point, as Mr. Brooks begins to flee, we see one of the officers he deploys his taser in an effort to stop the fleeing Mr. Brooks. It appears that it makes contact. And keep in mind, this has progressed in a matter of seconds from a simple DUI arrest to multiple felony charges that have now indicated that Mr. Brooks is now a danger to the public by his complete disregard for the law, complete disregard for those around him in an effort to escape, and complete disregard for the officers involved in this particular incident. The deployment of that taser the officer does appears to make contact with Mr. Brooks. The two probes appear to go in, but it apparently doesn't make a solid contact because Mr. Brooks continues fleeing. As the officer follows with the probe lines attached to Mr. Brooks, you can hear the taser cycling. And the other end of the taser is in his hand as he begins to chase after Mr. Brooks. At this point, still, in my opinion, a reasonable officer is not going to be using deadly force, and that's my opinion. This shifts in mere fractions of a second, though. As Mr. Brooks runs away, he decides to turn and engage the officer by firing the multiple round. There's multiple rounds in the particular taser. That means there's more than one shot available in that particular taser. He fires it over his shoulder at the pursuing officer. This bears a little taser deployment explanation, okay? Upon a solid taser connection, the operation of a taser will render a person incapacitated and totally unable to defend themselves for a minimum cycle time of 5 seconds. This is enough time for an officer trained in the operation of the taser to effect a lawful arrest, okay? However, it is also enough time for somebody who has proven themselves violent, untrained in the use of that taser, to take advantage of the officer should they be on the giving end of that taser deployment. Less than lethal still means it could be lethal in untrained hands. Mr. Brooks is untrained. It is also enough time to inflict serious bodily injury or even death to someone. And further, enough time to obtain an officer's service weapon, his handgun, from that incapacitated officer. Because of all of this, the encounter between Mr. Brooks and the officers involved have now at this point escalated to a deadly force encounter to just about any and all reasonable officers. The officer pursuing in these fractions of seconds drops the taser in his hand. He transitions to his service handgun, where he draws the weapon and fires 3 shots at center mass, as he has been trained to do. Now the question is always, why not shoot the leg? Thanks Joe Biden for that. Why not shoot just once? This can be a whole different video if you guys want to know more, okay? I can go into that. But the short version is a leg shot just is not feasible under high stress and a dynamically moving lethal force encounter, okay? Also, the brain cannot tell the body to stop shooting fast enough to limit it to 1 shot, because once you've decided to shoot, that continues until the brain can stop. There are a plethora of studies on this if you should choose to research it on your own. Hit that search engine again, okay? In my opinion, this entire incident from beginning to end was handled professionally, by policy, and according to the law. The firing of the officer involved from his department and the threats of indictment for the officer or officers involved is total bullshit. It is a political move to try to placate to a race narrative and prevent the black community and those others who would benefit from that narrative from further regression into anarchy and violence towards the innocent. Additionally, Mayor Bottoms offering her opinion that just because you can doesn't mean you should shows her absolute ignorance of the law and procedure, as well as, in my opinion, an intent on creating further tensions by pandering to a particular group rather than backing the officers who were following procedure and the law to the freaking letter. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brooks caused his own death through his chosen actions. This is not race related. This is not bad cop related. This is a man making dumbass decisions related. And it cost him his life. Are there injustices that happen? Yes, absolutely. Those things exist, though much, much more rare than you were led to believe by the media and all the social justice warriors online. We have seen those injustices in the past in the last few weeks. We saw that in the Ahmaud Arbery case, where it did not involve law enforcement. And as the full truth of the facts have come out, justice will be served to those men involved. And I hope they get all the freaking justice that they can stand. We saw this stuff in the death of Mr. George Floyd and the officer there. And as the facts and full truth of that encounter continue to come out, because we still don't know it all, we will see justice in the courts, and I am confident of that. This incident, however, is not like those. And the posturing of people in local government, the general public, and the ridiculous #nonsense movements to paint this incident as controversial and race-related just because Mr. Brooks was black, a black male, are absolutely racist in nature, and I'm ashamed of every single person that would say otherwise. If you see this as anything other than what it was, perhaps you need to evaluate and educate yourself with truth, because you're grossly misinformed. As I've said before, the whole truth and all the facts, they matter. Seek truth in everything. Love people, hate evil, and take a stand for and against those things where you are able and equipped to do so. Until next time.